G'day YouTube and welcome to the latest Loggerhead devlog. In this episode I'm going to take you through how I'm currently building my AI and animation systems for my enemies. You might learn something, but chances are you probably won't because I still don't know what I'm doing. This is just what works for me, so you might still find it interesting. Stick around to the end of the video because there might be a little deal coming up for the spooky season. Hope you enjoy. Bye. So it turns out I'm pretty old. And while I'm not this old, I am this old. My time gaming has been a long one, and in that time I've seen some pretty cool advances in AI. When I first started playing games, AI were basically just obstacles that either walked back and forth in predictable patterns or just hurled themselves at you across the screen. And while this still works for many games, it's not really AI. I remember the first game that really blew me away with its AI, and that was GoldenEye on the N64. It's pretty simple by today's standards, or was it? I can explain that in a minute. Enemies seemed to have at least half a brain as they responded to noise, performed poorly executed dodge rolls that allowed you to pump them with lead, or responded realistically to being shot in the anus or crotch. Fast forward to today, and not only just in video games, but AI and other systems are a hot topic, as machine learning will no doubt spell our doom. I just hope our machine overlords are friendly. Why would they want to hurt us? Oh yeah. While I await the inevitable and hope that the robot taking my job is named Gary, let's get back to what this means for my game, or possibly yours. Unity is moving forward into machine learning, and it has a few resources out there on ML agents, or machine learning agents. This is where you can teach small cubes to do things, which is pretty cool. And while it might be frustrating to sit there and patiently wait for your opponents to learn how to play you, it's probably best to just code your own enemies. It's worth thinking about what sort of AI your game needs. You don't need smart enemies to make a great or challenging game. Take something like Dark Souls for example. This game is hard. I raged quit out of this thing due to my slow boomer reflexes. While the enemies of Dark Souls are quite challenging, they're actually fairly stupid. The real challenge comes from the combat and learning the patterns of attack and how and when to counter a strike. It's actually probably not too dissimilar to Dance Dance Revolution. On the other end of the scale is Alien Isolation, a game for people who lack a significant amount of chronic low stress in their life. If you haven't played this game, then it's possibly a good thing. The AI of the Xeno thing is pretty advanced, ready to rip you out of your safe little hidey hole at any point and kill you. While I was learning more about this game, it turns out that the AI actually has two brains. One brain knows where you are and gives the other hints, a bit like popular childhood blood sport Marco Polo. So now that I've had enough inspiration, what does that mean for my humble indie game? A finite state machine is a series of behavior states that an AI will follow depending on what it's prompted to do. An example of this might be an idle state. Then when the enemy sees the player, they move into a chase state, and when they're close enough to the player, they move into an attack state. And if the player retreats, they go between attacking and chasing. Many modern games used a more advanced version of this basic concept. Take Naughty Dog games for example. They seem to run a variation of this for their enemies. This includes a patrol state, where the enemy will wander around to specific points, a chase state, where the enemy spies the player, an attack state when the enemy gets into a position to do so. If the player manages to get away, the enemy will move into a state of searching for the player. And if they fail to find them, they'll go back to their patrol state. Of course, the enemy can be killed at any point in this state machine. So how do I program my AI? Well, one reference comes to mind. So for Loggerhead enemies, I've decided to go for something a bit similar. Basically, there are two main states. The Loggerhead is either currently aware of the player or not aware of the player. In the non-aware state, the Loggerhead will patrol. This means that the Loggerhead will wander randomly between some waypoints in the level. The Loggerhead can become aware of the player in a number of ways. He can see the player, he can bump into the player, he's hit by the player, or the player makes a noise running close to him or firing a weapon. It's all here in my beautiful code. So basically the Loggerhead has a field of view. This is an angle, which if the player enters that angle and is less than the view distance, they can see the player. This is one method of the Loggerhead becoming aware. Almost every other method is controlled by colliders, where the Loggerhead will enter the aware state when it collides with anything related to the player. Once alerted, the Loggerhead now has a number of radiuses, or is it radii, that determine what it should do next. The attack radius determines how close the player needs to be to trigger the attack state. If the player is outside this radius, the Loggerhead will attempt to get close enough to attack. So how does the player escape the relentless pursuit of these lumbering ghouls, you might ask? For this, I use a simple timer. The timer resets to the maximum value each time the Loggerhead gets a visual on the player, and starts counting down when the Loggerhead can no longer see the player. This mimics a search function that allows the player to elude the Loggerhead until the timer reaches 0, and the Loggerhead will simply go back to his patrol route. I also have another counter called the hide threshold, which is less time for the player to make a speedy getaway. In the game environment, there are a specific number of hide points where the player can hide from the Loggerhead. The player cannot hide if the hide threshold is too high, but if the counter is less than the current hide threshold, i.e. the Loggerhead hasn't seen the player for a few seconds, the player is able to hide, and thus the Loggerhead gives up and returns to his patrol. Controlling the enemy Loggerhead is 2 scripts. 1. Enemy health. This controls if the Loggerhead is dead or not, his reaction to damage, and how much damage he receives. Secondly, there's enemy AI. This runs what state the enemy is in, patrolling, chasing, attacking the player, or choosing what waypoint to move to next. It also controls a lot of the animations found in the animation controller. The Unity animation controller is a critical component of the enemy AI, and in itself is a state machine, which reflects almost exactly the state machine within the code. Animations are connected by conditions and plays the animation required that is called by the code. I also have different reactions playing depending on what weapon the enemy is struck with. The player also has an animator, but let's not talk about that right now. So while this enemy and AI system is not perfect, it does work well for the type of game I'm creating and fits in with the horror theme, still in its early stages, and of course this could all change. I hope as time goes by, I can hone my coding skills better, rather than Frankensteining it all together, but as I always say, if it works, it works. This AI system is quite different to the AI I used in my first game, Martha, but that's probably a subject for another video, as it's quite unique and cool within itself. Anyway, I'm still pretty new to this YouTube thing, so if that's something you'd be interested in seeing and finding out more about, let me know down in the comments. Until then, I think I'll call it a day. Well guys, as promised, you learnt absolutely nothing. But at the very least, I hope you were entertained. Thank you so much for watching again. For my next video, I'm thinking of doing something maybe around building a Steam page. I'm going to take you through what I'm doing. It's going really, really, really well. As promised at the start of the video, there's something coming up for the spooky season. If you are interested in my game Martha, I will be running a sale over Halloween. I'm also doing the 100 Days of Game Dev Challenge on Twitter, which is also being done by a lot of other game devs more talented than me. So if you want to check that out, it's a lot of fun and I'm enjoying it. If you enjoy the video, make sure you like, subscribe, hit the bell, do the thing. Until next time, I will see you later. Goodbye.